The wind in Chicago doesn't just blow, it bites. It is a predatory thing that searches for any gap in your clothing, any weakness in your spirit, and settles there until it numbs the soul. On a Tuesday in late January, Elena Vance sat on a frozen metal bench on the corner of Michigan Avenue. The Magnificent Mile was anything but magnificent tonight. The neon signs of high-end boutiques flickered through the heavy snowfall, casting garish shades of red and blue across the ice-slick sidewalk. Elena was 32, but tonight she felt 100. She sat hunched, her body trembling in waves she could no longer control. Fever heat burned behind her eyes, clashing cruelly with the cold gnawing at her bones. Beneath her thin, threadbare coat, she wore a gray polyester maid's uniform, a garment that felt like a second skin of shame. Her hands were bare, the skin cracked and swollen from a day of scrubbing marble floors with harsh lye and bleach. Only an hour earlier, she had been on her knees in a Gold Coast penthouse that smelled of expensive candles and old money. She had whispered to her employer, a man who owned half the skyline but didn't have a soul, "Mr. Henderson, I have a fever. I just need to go home." He hadn't even looked up from his tablet. "You people always have excuses when the work gets hard," he'd sneered. "Finish the foyer or don't bother coming back." Elena had pushed through the haze of pain, scrubbing until her vision blurred. When she finally finished, Henderson didn't even hand her the money. He threw a $50 bill onto the wet marble floor, a fraction of what they'd agreed upon, and told her it was a deduction for poor performance. When she tried to protest, he had hurled a heavy crystal paperweight at the wall near her head, the shattering glass a final punctuation to her termination. Now she was alone. The buses had stopped running due to the blizzard. She coughed a deep, rattling that tore at her chest. She closed her eyes, letting the snow cover her lashes. Maybe if she just slept for a minute, the cold wouldn't hurt any more. The sound of tires crunching on ice broke the silence. A massive, sleek black Cadillac Escalade slowed to a crawl at the curb. Its headlights cut through the whiteout conditions like twin suns. In the back seat, 5-year-old Maya Sterling pressed her mittened hands to the glass, her breath fogging the window. She saw the shivering woman on the bench. "Daddy, look," Maya whispered. "She looks like Mommy did in my bad dreams. She's freezing." Caleb Sterling gripped the steering wheel. He was a man who had built a tech empire worth billions, a man known for his cold efficiency and iron will. Yet, he couldn't fix the silence that had lived in his own home for 2 years. Since his wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident on Lakeshore Drive, Caleb had lived like a ghost, moving through a world of gray. He didn't stop for strangers. In Chicago, you minded your own business if you wanted to survive. But something about the way the woman's head hung, the utter defeat in her posture, made him hit the brakes. Caleb stepped out of the car, the wind whipping his charcoal overcoat. He reached into the back seat and grabbed a navy blue cashmere scarf, soft and still faintly scented with the lavender sachets Sarah used to keep in the closets. He crossed the street and draped it gently around Elena's shoulders. Elena flinched, her eyes snapping open. She saw a man who looked like he belonged on a skyscraper billboard, his eyes full of a tired honesty. "I'm fine," she gasped, her voice raspy. "Just waiting for the next bus." "The buses are grounded, Elena," he said, catching the name on her uniform tag. "You'll freeze before the next one comes. My daughter and we can't leave you here." The warmth of the cashmere was a shock to her system. Elena looked at the SUV. Maya was waving a small hand from the window. Pride fought with the instinct to survive, but the fever was winning. She nodded. The warmth inside the SUV stung her frozen skin, but it was the most beautiful pain she had ever felt. Maya leaned forward from her car seat, handing Elena a pink hair tie. You can fix my ponytail, the girl whispered. It's messy. Elena chuckled softly, her hands trembling as she gathered the child's curls. Caleb watched them in the rearview mirror, his throat tightening. His daughter hadn't let anyone touch her hair since the funeral. Caleb's home in Lincoln Park was a masterpiece of glass and stone, a minimalist fortress that overlooked the frozen park. It was breathtaking, but as Elena stepped inside, she felt the hollow ache of the place. There were no photos on the mantels, no toys on the rug. It was a museum of a life that had ended. Caleb showed her to a guest suite at the end of a long, quiet hallway. On the nightstand, he had placed a steaming mug of real cocoa and a note that read, "Thank you for staying. Just for tonight." Elena sat in a plush armchair, wrapping herself in a quilt. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. By the second day, the snow had turned the city into a white silence. The roads remained closed, and Caleb's domestic staff was stranded. Elena, her fever having broken, found herself in the kitchen. She found Caleb staring at a high-tech espresso machine with the frustration of a man who could code an operating system but couldn't boil an egg. Elena stepped in, her movements fluid and purposeful. She made pancakes, thick golden stacks with blueberries, and scrambled eggs with just a hint of chives. As the aroma filled the house, the glass fortress began to change. Maya came bounding down the stairs in fuzzy socks shaped like bears. "It smells like a real house," she shouted. Caleb watched them from the doorway. He watched Elena show Maya how to sift powdered sugar, the flour dusting the air like magic. "Elena," Caleb said later that afternoon, his voice more grounded than she had heard it before, "I'm offering you a position. Not just as a maid, I have people for that. Maya needs a presence. This house needs a heartbeat. Live in, full benefits, and you'll never have to answer to a man like Henderson again." Elena looked at Maya, who was currently drawing a sun on a paper napkin. "I don't do things halfway, Caleb," Elena said. "If I stay, I'm not just an employee. I'm a part of this girl's life. I care." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Caleb replied. The weeks that followed were a blur of transformation. The refrigerator was soon covered in colorful crayon drawings. The Lego bins migrated into the living room. On a rainy Tuesday, Elena decided the mansion was too formal. She dragged silk pillows and cashmere throws into the center of the great room, building a massive blanket fort. When Caleb came home from a high-stakes board meeting, he found the CEO of Sterling Tech was required to provide a password to enter the Castle of Chicago. He crawled inside the fort, and for 2 hours he played games and read stories by flashlight. As Maya fell asleep between them, Caleb's hand brushed Elena's. He didn't pull away. But the world outside Lincoln Park was not so kind. Caleb had to travel to New York City for a gala, and he insisted Elena and Maya come along. They spent a Saturday in Central Park, the winter sun pale and beautiful. They were laughing, Caleb holding Maya on his shoulders, while Elena tucked her hand into his arm. They looked like a family. But in the shadows of the trees, a lens clicked. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. Cinderella or Gold Digger? The tabloids screamed. The internet was a wildfire of judgment. Sarah's family, powerful New York socialites, called Caleb, accusing him of disgracing Sarah's memory with the help. Caleb grew quiet. The pressure of his board of directors and the weight of public scrutiny began to push him back behind his walls. He started working late again, skipping the pancake breakfasts. Elena felt the shift. It was a coldness that no cashmere scarf could fix. One night, she found him in his study, staring at a portrait of Sarah. "Are you ashamed of me, Caleb?" she asked. It's complicated, Elena, he sighed. I have to protect Maya. I have to protect the company. You're protecting your reputation, Elena said, her voice trembling. I was sitting on a frozen bench when you found me. I know what it's like to have nothing. But I won't have my dignity taken away by people who don't know my name. That night, Elena packed her bags. She left the expensive jewelry Caleb had tried to give her. She took only her old uniform, Maya's drawings, and the Navy scarf. She left a note on his desk. Maya needs a father who is brave. I hope you find him. I love you both. The mansion returned to a state of mourning. For 2 weeks, Maya stopped eating, stopped laughing, and stopped drawing. She sat in her room, staring at the door. Maya, please, Caleb begged one night. Where's Elena? She asked. She had to go, honey. She didn't leave because she wanted to, Maya said, her voice full of a child's devastating clarity. She left because you were scared. You're always scared, Daddy. That's why the house is cold. Caleb walked out of the room, her words ringing in his head. He went to his study and saw the Navy scarf. He realized he was the richest man in the city and the poorest man in the world. He had let the opinion of strangers cost him the only warmth he had found since the accident. He didn't call an investigator. He went to every shelter and community center in the city himself. He finally found her in a small kitchen on the south side, teaching a cooking class. He stood in the doorway watching her. I'm not leaving until you talk to me, he said. Elena wiped her hands on her apron. Go back to your glass house, Caleb. It's not a house anymore, Elena. It's just a building. I realized I spent my whole life building walls to keep the world out, but all I did was keep the love out. I don't care about the board. I don't care about the headlines. I care about the woman who taught me how to breathe again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold pendant. It was a sun. Maya wanted you to have this, and I want you to come home, not as an employee, as my partner, as Elena. The return was quiet. When the door opened, Maya didn't scream. She just ran. She hit Elena's knees so hard they both fell onto the marble floor. You stayed, Maya sobbed. I stayed, Elena promised. 6 months later, Chicago was in the grip of a humid, beautiful August. The Sterling mansion was full of life. The garden in the back, once a barren patch of mulch, was overflowing with tomatoes, sunflowers, and basil. Caleb and Elena stood on the patio, watching Maya chase a puppy through the sprinklers. Caleb leaned over and kissed Elena's temple. You were right about the tomatoes, he said. They just needed the right soil. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at the navy scarf draped over the porch swing. I'm glad I missed that bus, she whispered. Me too, Caleb replied. Me too. As the sun began to dip below the Chicago skyline, painting the clouds in bruised purples and brilliant oranges, Caleb reached for Elena's hand. The glass fortress was no longer a monument to what had been lost. It was a home defined by what had been found. He didn't just see a partner in her. He saw the architect of his second chance. He reached into the pocket of his linen jacket and pulled out a small, weathered object that seemed out of place in their luxurious surroundings. It was the original $50 bill, the one Henderson had thrown on the floor. Caleb had tracked it down, a symbol of the day her world broke and theirs began. I kept this, Caleb whispered, to remind me that the world might try to put a price on a person's worth, but they'll always get the math wrong. You're priceless, Elena. He took the bill, tore it into a dozen pieces, and let the summer breeze carry the scraps over the balcony railing. They watched the fragments dance away, disappearing into the greenery of the park like falling confetti. The wind doesn't bite anymore, Elena murmured, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. No, Caleb agreed, pulling her closer as Maya's laughter echoed from the garden below. It finally feels like it's carrying us home. The wind in Chicago might still bite, but for Elena, Caleb, and little Maya, the cold no longer has a place to settle. Their story reminds us that even when we feel like we're sitting on a frozen bench at our lowest point, the human spirit is a fireplace waiting for the right spark. We often build glass fortresses around ourselves to keep out the pain, but in doing so, we accidentally keep out the love, too. Sometimes, it takes a stranger with a cashmere scarf, or a woman with a handful of flour and a kind heart, to remind us how to breathe again. Thank you for spending your time with us here at Pub Stories. Life is a collection of chapters, and we're honored to share these moments of resilience with you. Before you leave the pub today, ask yourself, is there someone in your life who needs a little warmth today? Or perhaps, is it time for you to let someone in? If this story touched you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to join our growing community of storytellers. Until next time, stay warm, stay kind, and keep looking for the heartbeat in the silence. I'm Pub Stories, and I'll see you in the next chapter.